How's it going, YouTube? Coming today with another video, and today, guys, the brain is going to be where to hand trap post finite. Now, we don't have a ton of decks today, but that's because a lot of the ones that I've already covered, I don't want to keep recovering unless something else changes. So we're definitely going to be going over a lot of the new decks, and I really want to go in detail on how you really have to stop these decks, because it's not just like one interaction anymore. There's a lot of things that you really have to keep in mind whenever you're trying to hand trap the decks. That's why a lot of people are wanting to switch like board breakers. I still think that hand traps are going to be a move. So it's something that you really got to decide for yourself before an event, but hand traps are still going to be very strong going into the next format. If you haven't already checked out my sponsors over at Empyrean Duels, Dragon Shield, Gem, Cloud, RW, Grimoire, or Chainlink, definitely go ahead and check them all out down below in the description. Without further ado, let's hop right on into the first slide. The first deck that I have for you today is going to be Centurion. Now, Centurion is one of those decks that you probably won't see, but if you do see it, I do want to make sure that you know how to stop the deck. You can use Mourner, Veiler, Imperm on any of the summons of Trudea or Primera. Obviously, if it's a Mourner that you're using, then you have to wait for the special summon of the card. But either or, whichever one they start with, you just want to shut it down immediately. If they're starting off with Trudea from Scale, then it's like fine if you want to go ahead and hand trap the Trudea, but I'd probably just wait for the Primera to hit the board. Usually you just want to hand trap the Primera at all means necessary to stop the addition of the stand-up. But if they open normal summon Trudea, I have no problem on the effect just going Veiler Imperm. It's also very strong. Ash is usually going to be on like the pot card, especially Desires right now being a 3 of is crazy. So it's one thing that I feel like a lot of people were like, oh, it's fine that it's at 3, but you got to remember, drawing 2 has never felt better. So ashing the Desires or like a Prosperity, usually the best option, but if they do start normal summon the Primera, go ahead and just ash that instead, because again, we don't want to see stand-up hit the board. And then in the end phase, when your opponent goes to reset the Primera into their spell and trap zone, just crow it out of the graveyard or use a Bestial. This is going to really assure that your opponent just can't do anything on your turn, because they cannot go ahead and synchro summon, since Primera is their only tuner. So moving away from Centurion, because I feel like the deck really hasn't changed a whole lot, and it's still not really that relevant. But we do have Orcust, and this is something we're seeing this a lot with different decks. The base engine of it is what I want to cover, though. Using Mourner, Veiler, or Imperm on Galatea is going to be really strong. Mourner is going to be the worst one, because summoning out another Galatea is very easy to do. But at the same time, I do think that negating the effect of Galatea is really strong, because you do want to shut down things like Babel. It's going to be really hard when that's live to interact with your opponent. So making sure they don't get the Babel is really strong, or at least cutting off access to a Crescendo, because on the following turn of the usage of Crescendo, your opponent can also use that as a Rhoda. They do get Dark Machine locked, but it still never really mattered whenever they're already with all their engine. Galatea shutdown here is going to be the best. Ashing on Harp Horror was always just the most correct. This is going to be really strong. You just want to cut your opponent off from resources as much as possible, especially in a deck like this, as they're really prone to bricking. And then with Crow and Dingirsu, you want to go ahead and try to prompt your opponent to need to use the Dingirsu from Grave, which is really important, because if they go activate Symbol, the Reborn Ding, then you can chain Crow, get rid of it, and all of a sudden their whole play is just not that live. So save Crow for Ding. It's going to be the best thing that you can do. I know that it can be really tempting to like early on go ahead and banish something, which if they don't have Babel and they like dump Harp, you can probably just Crow it and be fine. But they could also have Extension to play through. So I'm probably just holding the DD Crow, because their end board really isn't that scary unless they do set their Crescendo. Even at that point though, right, like you can just go end phase and banish their Symbol, but it really does depend as well if they also have like a Nightmare Engrave. So kind of make the judgment call as you're going. But it is really ideal to hold the DD Crow for the Ding on your own turn whenever they try to summon it. The next deck here is going to be Voiceless Voice. Now, this is a really interesting one. Another ritual deck coming up in the format. You see 2 cards here, but these are the most important ones you do want to stop. Now, Nobox is going to be the card here that you see right here, here, and here. I couldn't find like a TCG variant of the card, so I apologize about that. I try to get those as much as possible. But so this card is going to be really important to the strategy. Your opponent has to have this on board to make their boss monster have a negation. So whenever your opponent tries to reborn this from graveyard, DD Crow it, bell the effect of it. You don't want this to come back to the board. And then if the card does get summoned and use the effect, you do want to make sure that you are using Mourner, Valor, Imperm on Novax, because this will get them to the card that will activate the Continuous, which is also really scary because then it gets them to their Omni Negate and even further into their plays. Ashe on the Saphira level 6 is going to be the all-time best thing that you can do against this deck. Like, obviously, if they open pre-prep, it seems very tempting to do. But ashing Saphira is so crazy. You can also DD Crow Saphira because in the graveyard, you can Ignition, banish it, and make it a ritual spell. But at the same time, using Ashe against this card is so crazy, and then DD Crow and Novax is probably just my priority over a Saphira, to be honest, just because the Novax on board is so crucial to the strategy. So definitely make sure that you're banishing Novax, you're ashing the Saphira, and then doing whatever you can to negate the Novax on the board. Now for Rika, not a whole lot changes here post-Finite. The Jasmine is still the #1 hit that you want to do. So they're using the Aromage Laurel, which if you watched my really old video about Rika, this is the original combos that I was doing. Kind of similar to what's happening now, but the new Aroma card actually summons the Laurel from deck. So you do get the opportunity to do the same line, just a lot easier with less bricks. You're still going to be shutting down the Mudan or the Jasmine. It doesn't change. Yeah, they get a lot of searches and Droll hurts his deck immensely, but like you're still just shutting down Jasmine or Mudan 100% of the time. So I know they get a lot of cards and I know they're going to be doing a lot of things, but at the same time, hand trap spots don't change. Jasmine is still legal, Mudan is still legal, and you want to make sure that you are going ahead and just hand trapping both of them. The Rika engine's really strong, being able to get to Con and Sheet, and then Jasmine, of course, just gets you into literally anything that you want. Talking about Labyrinth, I know this is one that a lot of people are really scared about right now because it is a very scary matchup, especially with Eradicator somehow still in the format. So let's go ahead and talk about a few things here that are going to be really important to note. First and foremost, your opponent still needs to draw the rollback if they're going to furniture pitch it, which means they also need to draw the furniture to pitch it. Unless they're doing what I'm doing and going Lady Labyrinth, set Marilla, and then you can use like Coup Clock to activate Marilla and dump rollback, which is definitely cool. But at the same time, your opponent has to open pretty well, and you can still do a lot of the same things. It does get annoying when you like Ashe or Bell Big Welcome and then they go rollback Big Welcome. But at the same time, I feel like the deck itself is a lot more consistent, but not a lot changes. So you're still going to negate the Ariana. A lot of times in the OCG, we are seeing them play the Ariane to go ahead and pitch the rollback as well. Which, I mean, I guess, but I don't really think that's, like, insane to do. I think that Ariana just going ahead and negating this one is going to be your best bet. You're always going to Ashe the Big Welcome if you only have Ashe, but if they open the Welcome, then you might have to just Ashe the Welcome, because if they summon out Lovely from deck, then you can't Ashe the Big Welcome then anyway. So, something to consider. If my opponent opens up Welcome, I'm probably just going to go ahead and shut that down. But if their first thing is Big Welcome, I'm absolutely just ashing that immediately. This is the card that we just don't want to see in rotation. DD Crow on the Coup Clock is still very good when they go Furniture Pitch, and then they go Coup Clock Effect to Reborn. DD Crow, they do have to pass at that point unless they can put a Labyrinth on board so they can use that trap, because it does require them to have Labyrinth. Just note that if you do respond to the effect, they can go ahead and summon like an Arius. But DD Crowing an Arius also is not that bad too, because they can go ahead and use the effect immediately as well. So definitely something to consider. Either or really strong, but I still think DD Crow and the Coup Clock, because I still think Coup Clock is just better than Arius. But it really depends on what situation you find yourself in the game. Bell and Big Welcome, that really goes without saying. And then Meister is a really interesting tech option in this format. That's something you want to check out. Using it on things like Rollback, you can use it against Fire King pretty well. You can use it against Snake Eye and things like Flamebridge. It's not going to be really popular, but Meister could see a little bit of play. I do think that it's a really cool card, so definitely something to really consider. So definitely go ahead and check out a lot of these different spots for hand traps, because I feel like this is going to be a really interesting one whenever it comes to actually playing the matchup. And it's going to be really dependent on how your opponent opens and how you can just generically interact with your opponent. Because, like, if you are in a game state where your opponent activates a big welcome immediately, you're just going to have to throw your hand trap at it and hope that is enough, right? But if your opponent goes like Coup Clock, furniture, set big welcome, second furniture, pitch a rollback, like you already know that you're in for a rough game, right? So definitely go and start testing this now, because this is going to be a really prominent matchup. So the next deck we have here is Snake Eye. So Snake Eye is really interesting. We'll talk about like the Fire King variant after. You really want to make sure that you have a way to stop the OTK. It's really easy to do. If your opponent has a fire on board and they can summon a Zelanius, you're going to be in real trouble. Being able to go the Zelanius after you have the Link 4 on board, the Blazing Phoenix, you're going to be able to reborn both monsters to your board, especially if you have the additional monster that you're going to reborn off the Zelanius. Use the Princess Engraved, pop a monster your opponent controls and your extra monster, reborn itself, and if there's a fire, then you can go ahead and reborn the Blazing Phoenix as well. So definitely very cool. A lot of damage that you can put up out of nowhere. I do recommend that if you are having a hard time with spot removal, that you at least go ahead and like DD Crow the Princess on effect. Still really strong. This card is going to be an absolute menace next format, so just make sure you have a plan. If your deck isn't really like that bad with spot removal, then you might be fine, but it's something that you really want to keep in the back of your mind. I'm probably always just going to go ahead and negate the Black Witch the second it hits the board. It's whichever one hits first, honestly, if it's the Ash or the Black Witch. Either or is perfectly fine. Shutting down the whole Ash effects is really solid. Obviously, the E-Telly from deck is crazy. If you have nothing else, though, I'm probably just going to go ahead and shut down Ash with like an Ash as well. Either or, I don't really think that one is more correct than the other. When you have Ash or Black Witch, you have the full combo, so you just gotta hope they don't have the other one. This deck is going to be really cool, but I do think that there's a lot of ways that you can counter this. Again, we talked about Meister, which is really strong still against the Flamberge and Grave, because a lot of times your opponent's going to be setting the IP in the Spell and Trap Zone and then bringing it back out in your draw phase so they can go ahead and combo. At least on your turn, which is really nice because you can go ahead and go like, especially in the Fire King variant, you can go Kieran, pop the Flamberge, and then you go Flamberge effect and you summon back Populous and the Ash. You go add, or you can bring back like Ponix. You add go IP into your Appaloosa or whatever else you realistically want to go into. Could just be in SP as well. But this is a really tough matchup. There's a lot of ways to interact. So definitely go ahead and stop the OTK. Get rid of the Princess. You also have to worry about like the Blazing Phoenix, so like just read that card, make sure you understand it, because if you start getting rid of fire monsters, it can also be really unfortunate. And then shutting down the Black Witch, I feel like in this deck and this deck is going to be really important. The only thing that really changes between the two, though, is like Ash just goes to the Fire King Island. You just don't want your opponent to be able to get to things like Garunix. But overall, I do really enjoy the format coming up. I'm not a huge fan of any of the fire decks, unfortunately. Usually I'm a fan of something, but right now I'm really not. Maybe that'll change coming up soon. But I think this deck is going to be really crazy. But I do think that playing the Fire King cards is nothing but benefits to the deck anyway. So I think that if you consider these cards, you probably should just consider them together. You know that you're playing against regular Snake Eye if you see like Dramatic Chase and what have you, and like the Diabellstar Trap. But this one obviously is going to have like a really small Fire King engine. It's going to be like 1 or 2 Garunix, 3 Kieran, and then like a couple Ponix and Fire King Island. You might see 1 Arvada as well. It's a rather small package though, but I do think that it's really strong. If this video did help you, definitely let me know down below in the comment section. Definitely a lot of fun to be able to look ahead to new formats. Of course, we have a lot of time to test, and this could change a lot between now and then when we get to Vegas. So I might do an update before Vegas, but I hope this at least gives you a guideline to look at the format and really be able to consider your options when you're looking at deck building, because it's going to be really important to decide if you're going to be playing hand traps or board breakers. If you haven't already checked my Discord, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, or my Metafy page, definitely go down below in the description and check it all out. Catch you all in the next video, and I appreciate all of you. Thank you.